everyone, my name's Sophie Scott and I'm a board member of I Have the Right To. To mark National Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we are doing our second season of interviews with survivors of sexual assault to serve as a resource for fellow survivors looking for guidance in how to navigate survivorship. The idea for these conversations, this web series, came from a conversation that I had with Chessie back a number of years ago, where she expressed she wished there was a resource where she could have heard more from other survivors of sexual assault back when she was younger. And I said, well, wait a minute, why don't we create that ourselves? And so that's what this is. And we're really excited for you to hear from, to learn from all of the incredible survivors that we have spoken to for this second season. Mal, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I'm hoping that there is something that you can share with us today that you wish you could have told your younger self as you began your healing journey.
Oh, thank you, Sophie. It's really nice to be with you here today, too. Thanks for the conversation. It's a great question. I think looking back, I really wish I had understood that, any shame I was feeling coming out of my sexual assault experience, that was not shame for me to bear. It wasn't shame for me to carry. And it took me a long time to recognize that. And I think equally as important is understanding just the related impact that experience was going to have on my own sense of self-worth. And I think in so many ways throughout the course of my adult life, I was internalizing a lot of negative messages about my own self. And I think through that experience, I was feeling like I wasn't worthy of all of the things. I wasn't worthy of real love and healthy relationships. And of course I am, just like anybody else. And so really just having awareness around the impact of that experience on my own mental health. I would say for starters.
How did you begin to navigate some of those really challenging moments, especially when, you didn't feel like you were worthy of love?
Yeah, I think for me, Sophie, I would have experiences in my professional life, for example, even in my marriage, where I didn't necessarily see myself as being capable of certain things or worth having like a seat at the table with others, yet others could see that in me. And that was a real eye-opener for me. It's like others can see this in me and I'm not able to see it in myself. And so I suddenly became aware of this disconnect. And so, I think one of the things I've really loved learning is, I think when I think about my sexual assault experience with lots of trauma, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, I was not necessarily excited to navigate things through therapy because who wants to drudge all of that pain up and those memories? I'm thinking I'm fine. I'm well adjusted. I've built a normal life for myself. Why do I need to go through all of that? And I kind of thought of that as a negative experience. And I've really come a long way in recognizing how not only important that work has been in my healing journey, but I've also seen it as something to actually look forward to. It wasn't the drudgery and pain that I think I was expecting. And one of the pieces of that is learning that there's true science around rewiring the pathways in your brain. So as I become increasingly aware of the negative self-talk that I'm subjecting myself to every day, reinforcing those negative messages that somebody had put upon me all those years ago, that I actually can rewire my own brain to think positive messages, replace and reframe those negative messages with positive ones, then I'm absolutely worthy of. Yeah.
When you were going through that process, was that something that took a long time for you to get to that point? And, as you were navigating it, what did you do to help yourself overcome hurdles, obstacles along the way?
Yeah. So on the therapy front, truth be told, I've been in therapy for many, many years. I hold my therapist near and dear to my heart, Maria. She's amazing. And so definitely not a quick fix, right? But it's not had to be this overwhelming undertaking. She's really a soft spot for me to land and open up to, and she's objective, unbiased, and that's very different, of course, than talking to a dear and trusted friend, which obviously is really important and amazing, and you need that. But there's so much value in having somebody who can look at things objectively and look at you objectively. That's really important feedback. The other piece of the work around negative self-talk and rewiring my brain pathways, that's been much more recent for me, and I'm so excited about that. And that's a matter of doing some reading, listening to amazing podcast episodes where I can learn about how I can just make this a powerful and positive thing for me. It's very empowering that I can take control of that history and frankly make it work for me.
As you've been taking control, which is an incredibly powerful thing to hear, what other resources have you found helpful? You mentioned therapy, but you also mentioned speaking to loved ones around you. What things do you think it would be helpful for people around a survivor to know as they're navigating that journey?
Yeah. Yeah. I really would love others to understand the power that they have in using their voice. And using your voice can mean lots of different things. It doesn't necessarily have to mean shouting from the rooftops about your experience. I think a lot of times survivors can maybe feel a lot of pressure to speak outwardly, maybe in an advocacy or activism sense of things. And just, I think everybody should know that you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that now. You don't have to do that ever if that's not for you, if that doesn't feel good for you. But I also think there's great power in using your voice. To your point, Sophie, you'd mentioned, talking with a friend, a trusted friend, or a trusted loved one. There's great power in that, and I think that's so important to have that shoulder to lean on, because you do need support. I forgive the comparison, but if we think about maybe being in a terrible car accident, and you're in a car and your car was hit by a wrong way driver, you've got significant injuries perhaps. And the same is true for sexual assault survivors. We have some injuries and they're not necessarily visible. So there's healing to be done, and you've got to tend to those wounds. And I think a big part of that is connecting with loved ones and having that support network around you. So I would say don't be shy about seeking that out and finding that soft spot to land. And then I think there's also really power in your voice. That's that internal voice. It's not necessarily something that you might outwardly vocalize, but being kind to yourself, and again, recognizing there's no shame for you to bear. Certainly, you were not the wrong way driver hitting yourself, right? And again, being aware of that, those negative messages that might be floating around in your mind, and using your internal voice to rewrite those messages for yourself.
How do you know, though, when you're engaging in these conversations, were there moments where you were met with skepticism from the people who you thought you could lean on? And if so, how did you handle that?
So, in my circumstance, I was in a situation where I was living under the perpetrator's roof. And there was some complexity in that because I, under his roof, I had a warm bed, we had heat, we had electricity, we had food, and my brother and I were coming from an environment, our own home, where we didn't have those things. So it was a very complex scenario. And I didn't initiate the talking to someone else. That kind of was put upon me in terms of like social services coming to investigate a scenario. And admittedly, in that situation, I was defensive and very much looking to keep everything secret, even protect the abuser, the perpetrator. And I now understand why I was doing that. I was a child. It was a matter of survival as well. And it was very confusing, frankly. And, as it was much later in my life where I finally felt comfortable sharing that with loved ones or a significant other. And those were important moments to be able to share that and have my experiences, just some understanding and validation from where I was coming from and what my experiences were.
You recently published your first book, Raising Wrenns. How did you decide that you felt ready to share your story in that capacity? And what was it like to write everything down?
Whew. Yes, you're right. So decided to put all of my memories of my life so far down on paper in my memoir. And yes, my experience with sexual assault was an important part of that story. I think for me, again, I had gotten to this point in my life where I logically knew none of this was my fault, right? I also knew it's deeply personal, and it's frankly very raw. And so there's a lot of vulnerability and putting that out into the world. For me, it was in a way akin to journaling, right? I could write it down on paper, get it out of my head and out into the open. And there was something weirdly safe about just putting it in a book and putting it out into the world, as opposed to just openly talking about it and verbalizing things and having people react to it live. I could put it out into the world and let people react to it and still have the space to then react to them. And so it came from, I was very vulnerable in putting it out there for sure. There were very uncomfortable moments in detailing what happened. And if I'm being honest, it felt really cringy sometimes. I'm like, am I really going to put this out there for others to read? And I would go back and forth. Sometimes I would take passages out and then I would put them back in. And ultimately, I felt that it was very important to be honest and recognize again, there's no cringe in my doing. It was all cringe in kind of the perpetrator's doing. Yeah, so I'm glad I was honest and let the raw be raw, because it is. And I also didn't want to discount, not only my experience, but what others might be experiencing. And I would say that's been one of the greatest gifts coming out of this experience, is I'm blown away by the number of people that I hear from that can relate to my story. And there seems to be some healing in sharing those experiences together.
Yeah,
I'm grateful for that.
what has that been like? Have people approached you? And, when they do, what is that like for you to know you've had an impact on their lives in such a profound way?
Yeah, it's been very much a surprise, an unexpected gift, I would say. And I'm grateful that people have a story they can relate to. In my experiences, I'm so grateful that they feel comfortable reaching out to me, and they're now using their voice, even if it's just with me. Hopefully, there's broader healing in that, but that they can feel comfortable and say, "Hey, I I get what you've gone through, and I've gone through something just like that, and I've never felt like I could share it." So there's great empowerment, I think, in that. And I'm just so pleasantly surprised and so thrilled that in some small way my story can help facilitate that.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Mel. I really appreciate your time. This has been incredible to hear from you.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to talk with you today, Sophie.
I actually learned so much from you personally, so thank you so
Oh,
much.
you're kind. Oh, thank
You're
you.
just so, I
Appreciate
think,
it.
truly one of the most generous things that a person could do would be to be willing to share the darkest, most challenging moments of their life and be willing. I mean, that's such a generous thing to make yourself vulnerable in that way, and something that I very, very deeply admire. And so I thank you for
I
your
was
willingness to
going to
do
get
that.
through this without crying, Sophie,
Oh,
but
no, it's okay. No problem.
now you've done it.
We love a good cry, let me tell you.
That's right.
Crying is, I think it's a very healthy thing, for sure.
That's right. A great release.
Definitely. No, 100%. But no, you're such a bright light and someone who I really admire and look up to. So I'm really excited that I got to talk to you today. Thank you so
That's an
much.
incredible compliment. Thank you.